I feel like people really get complacent thinking, oh, history's always moving forwards. Like progress always moves forwards, when what history shows us is it can just as easily go back if we're not careful. I think that history repeating itself, that's a good phrase, but one I've heard that I like better is history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme.
But
That's
go ahead.
basically the purpose of religion, trying to
Sure.
grasp that.
Right.
That's what everyone is trying to do, trying to understand what is beyond us,
Right.
why things happen as they happen, how to live the best life to live. And that's a trait a lot of people could sympathize with.
Right. And I mean, what we're doing right now is a product of my curiosity as well. So,
Right.
I'm happier for it, right? It like, if you explore those curiosities, I think you don't live with the regret of not trying something.
Yeah.
Hey, Christian, how's it going?
It's going all right. How about yourself?
Doing good. Thank you so much for joining me and doing this.
Yeah, happy to be here. I've never gotten to be on a podcast before, so I'm really excited.
Awesome. There's a first for everything, right?
Exactly.
Awesome. So before we get started, if you want to let the people on the internet know who you are, what you do, any likes and dislikes in personal life,
Yeah,
future aspirations, anything and everything you're comfortable sharing.
fair enough. My name's Christian. I'm a senior here at UCO studying history, education, and religious studies. My goal going forward, I really want to be a professor, so I'm trying to get through school. I ultimately want to get my doctorate so that I can do that, but that's easier said than done. As for likes, I really enjoy reading, video games, fishing, all kinds of stuff. But I really enjoy getting to be a scholar. That's one of my favorite things to do, honestly, which may sound weird to some, but I've always liked it. So, yeah.
Cool. I just wanted to mention, I should have probably mentioned this before we started recording, but if you're trying to figure out where to look, you can just look towards me, look towards the camera, wherever you want, where you're comfortable looking. Probably should have mentioned that earlier, but the admin stuff out of the way. So you said history, education, and your minor being in religious studies.
Yes.
Why that? Like, was there something from childhood that interests you? Curiosity?
I just find the topic fascinating, especially religions from around the world play a huge part in history and the way it develops and that kind of stuff. So I like to study them together to examine that relationship, how the history of a place affects the beliefs of the people there and how the beliefs of the people affect the history. It's a give and take kind of thing.
Right. It's kind of sort of circular in nature.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. What things about history do you like and what things about history do you not like?
Well, I've always found it fascinating. I mean, for some, it can be boring. Maybe it's just because I had good teachers, but I really enjoyed learning about the people. Not like there was a battle in 1848, this side won, this side lost, this many casualties. That's how it's often taught, and that's disappointing. But history is about more than just that. It's about the lives of these people and their actions and the consequences. It's the closest I've seen in scholarly fields to like TV drama.
Sure.
I mean, maybe it's boring because it's in the past, but it also affects us to this day, knowing how things got to be the way they are. At least in my opinion. That's why I like it.
Right. No, what you said there of how it's kind of like a TV drama reminded me of something one of my relatives said about history, in that it's a story, right? At the end of the day, that some teachers know how to teach, some teachers unfortunately don't.
Yeah.
Because one thing at least I can talk about from the perspective of how history was taught to me, a lot of it was about remembering dates, remembering like those important events that possibly changed culture.
Yeah.
But that was probably it. Like, I mean, sure, they would tell you everything associated with everything that was happening.
Right.
But they didn't necessarily, I guess, tell it like a story. It was more like, you need to remember these things. If you know these dates and you know the chronology and the timeline, you get points.
Yeah.
But that's about it, right? So I guess you sort of lose interest when things like that happen, or if it's taught that way, I should say.
No, for sure. I feel like a lot of the times, especially here in Oklahoma, what happens is history teachers aren't often hired just to be a teacher of history. Usually it's someone like who's coaching or someone on faculty who's just thrown into that position because it's open.
Right.
So a lot of times it's football coaches who don't really care about history.
Fair.
Or it's really old guys whose only interest is those battles because they grew up in that kind of culture where they cared about that kind of thing. So I'm trying to really, there's a new wave of teaching history, I feel like, and I really want to be writing it.
Gotcha. What are there like certain examples out there that show that there's a new wave coming?
Yeah, I feel like one of the best examples you can find on YouTube, like, for example, what's it called? An old show, Crash Course. Yes, same wavelength. That kind of thing, making it interesting and exciting and fun, because it really is if it's taught the right way.
Yeah.
But yeah, it makes me so sad when people say that it's boring. So I tried. My goal is to make it more interesting for people.
I'm sure. Yeah. I remember Crash Course because the first year that I came here, I had to take American history. And I remember watching a lot of those videos to sort of make sense of the topics that were being discussed in class. And I remember John Green, right? John Green and Hank Green? Yeah.
One of them.
They're on YouTube. You'll know who they are. If you've been on YouTube. Which I'm sure you have if you're watching this. Right. But yeah, like I really liked those videos and how they would break down a lot of the historical events that happened in America at that time. So yeah, I see what you mean in terms of making it interesting and how that new wave is through social media and like YouTube and all of that kind of stuff.
I mean, it doesn't have to be through social media. Sure. I just feel like that's sort of where this new style started, and it became really popular. Like people really got into history, like, or not even just history, school, like they never had before. And I think that by adopting some like of those things, making the class more interesting, telling a story more than regurgitating whatever the book says, that's what really is the key to get students more motivated to pursue fields in that, like careers in that field.
Do you think there's room for opinion to be shared when you're sharing stories of history?
Oh, yeah. I mean, for my classes here at UCO, a lot of them, we just like debate different viewpoints and ideas and that kind of thing. Because as much as like common school curriculums will try to say it's one story, this is the way it was, that's never the case. There's always another perspective. And so it's really interesting to be able to get, once people are interested, dig down deeper into that, because you can find a lot of differences that really are fascinating, and learn more from it.
Right. Yeah, because I guess like the reason for asking that question was that I think opinion can sometimes be mixed with information that's being given, right? So I guess sometimes it can be a challenge to separate the two.
Right. Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah. Part of learning history is being able to separate opinion from facts, but as I said, there's multiple perspectives, so you can't just do that on your own. You have to have a basis for where you're getting your ideas from. You can't just say, oh, someone told me that this such and such happened for such and such reason. You have to, the job of historians, digging deep and looking in the sources to find that.
Right. Maybe this is a bit of a controversial question, but maybe not from a sense of the circles that, or not the circles, but the kind of content that I listen to.
Right.
But do you think there's a lot of things about the past that we don't know or that have not been shared with us for some reason?
Inevitably, so much history has been lost to time.
Right.
Just because, I mean, the oldest people, before even language existed, would draw and sketch on rock, like by carving or by painting. Very, very few of those remain. Then later on, after writing existed, tablets started to be used to etch writings into. Those crumble, those break, those weather with water. Then the Egyptians brought papyrus, and those are even worse at that. We have even less from that time. So
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but could you elaborate on what papyrus is?
Yeah, papyrus, it's a prototype to paper, essentially. They would take sheets from the reeds on the Nile River and lay them out, soak them, dry them, and so it was essentially like a rough paper.
Like a rougher texture compared to paper?
Rougher texture, but it could burn, it could get water damaged, all that. And so there was a lot of information that was lost simply for that reason.
Right.
I can't speak to whether it was like intentionally removed from the public conscience. I have no evidence either way. I wouldn't be surprised, but I can't speak to that in any knowledgeable stance. But it is sad. I mean, that's why I find it so exciting when new digs find some new artifact we didn't know about, because that's a piece of history thought gone forever, and we suddenly have access and knowledge of it. And I think about how someday, thousands of years from now, archaeologists will be digging through our old libraries and universities to find like a single scrap of paper, maybe of like Harry Potter or something, and think, what is this weird religion they used to follow?
Yeah.
But even now, with how much information we have in the world, a lot of it's going digital. And if anything were to ever happen to our systems that exist, all of that, just like all the years prior, would be gone. And so I'm sure there's what we know of history is just like a drop in the bucket. But the problem isn't that people are taking it away from us necessarily. It's that nature takes it away from us inevitably.
Yeah, like time does its thing.
Yeah, time does its thing.
Yeah, we lose things, and yeah, I understand what you mean in terms of people. And I guess the question for me comes from the things that I hear, and I know some people might call this person controversial, but I listen to a lot of the Joe Rogan Experience podcasts where he tends to have historians or what is this word? Authors. Journalists, that's the word I was looking for. Things of that nature.
Right.
And, they would have conversations about how, mostly in the realm of psychedelics and like its connection to religion. And its connection to civilization and so on. And because of my background in forensic science and like how that is also connected to drugs and all that kind of stuff. Like, I find it interesting.
There is undoubtedly some existing connections between psychotics and religion in history. I mean, in the modern day, take for example Rastafarians.
Right.
That's a religion where it's a very key function of the religion. But even in the past, there's some historians and religious scholars who theorize, for example, the Oracle of Delphi and like Greek mythology, that kind of stuff.
No.
So
if you want to give us a crash course.
Yeah. So back in Greek times, in the city of Delphi, it was dedicated, the city worshipped Apollo. Apollo, the god of the sun, the god of prophecy, and one of the head people in that worship was the Oracle, a woman chosen to serve for life, basically giving prophecy to people. And it was often very vague and confusing, sort of like fortune cookies, It's not saying anything direct. Some people theorize, though, that in Delphi there's like volcanic hotspots where like fumes get released, and they think some of the gases, literally the Oracle got high on these gases. So when people visited, her ramblings weren't prophecy, but it was like she was stoned off her ass.
Right.
But there is some precedent to that. As for other religions, I don't really know.
Right.
But it is interesting, and it's a topic I've heard talked about before.
Right. I'm going to jump back a little to what you said about Rastafarianism.
Yeah.
Do you want to touch on what that is for some of us who might not know what that is? I know what that is, but...
Right. I'm not an expert, per se, on Rastafarianism.
It's just a little bit of what you know.
Yeah. I know that it's based in Jamaica, primarily, and cannabis is often used in religious service and just spiritual experiences and so on. As for nitty-gritty like beliefs and practices, I'm really not sure.
Right.
Unfortunately, I want to know more, but it's a field I'm kind of vague in.
Gotcha. It's all good. I just wanted for you to sort of bring that up, and I guess to sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Like cultural figure that you can connect that to is probably Bob Marley, you would
Yes,
say,
definitely.
because of his connection to music. And I remember writing a paper on this topic, Bob Marley, and like the connection of music to the religion, I think.
Interesting.
A few years back for world music, I think that was the name of the class. I don't remember much of it anymore because that was like 4 years back at this point, but
Yeah.
I do remember that connection there. And yeah, it's fascinating how a lot of these things are connected to religion and how they've sort of morphed into something different in the current times that we live in, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I think what's also interesting, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong in saying this, but in some sense, like people and the stories that people tell are sort of the channel for a lot of these ancient history or historical occurrences to sort of go down to the next generation, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So I guess some details can be lost purely through conversation.
Yes.
And history may just change over time, microscopically, I guess, because of that.
Like in small pieces over thousands of years.
Right. And over time, the story that might have been said 1,000 years ago is probably very different from the story that's been said 1,000 years later. Is that something that could be corrected for, do you think?
Well, it kind of already has, in a way. So, in far ancient history, that was a big problem. For example, stories like Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, they only exist today because it was passed down through generations. And even those sort of give a early allowance for preserving stories because in the original language they were poems. So by building it in rhyme and putting it to a beat and that kind of stuff, it could be remembered more like a song, and songs are generally easier to remember.
Right.
But even then, some gets lost. However, when writing came around, Homer's Iliad, in the version it was at once the writing was invented, was set in stone, essentially. The only problem there is translation to other languages. That's where you can still lose some information. But the thing is, we still have a lot of those older versions in the original language. So we can go back, check what's there as compared to what exists now, and see if there was any bias in the translator or just any mistakes, that kind of stuff. Like, for example, I think there was a feminist author recently who did her own translation of, I can't remember if it was the Iliad or the Odyssey, but...
And what are those, if you want to just...
Yes, they are ancient Greek myths, legends, epic poems. And so the first one, the Iliad, covers the Trojan War, which was long thought to be mythical. Like, people didn't think it actually happened until, I want to say it was the 1800s, that they found the ruins of Troy, like as described. Of course, there weren't like gods shooting arrows at the main characters in the actual battle. It's a fictionalized version of a real event. But then the Odyssey is sort of the sequel, and it's purely fictional, and it's about the journey of one of the side characters in the previous book, how it took him like 20 years to get home, sailing all through the Mediterranean, essentially. So these poems were originally spoken in Greek, then written in Greek, and recently, I can't remember her name, but this scholar, she went back and retranslated it and was arguing that there was a lot of bias against women in the translations we have. Which I haven't done any translation myself. I don't know how, but it is really interesting because those different sides can be argued and that kind of stuff, which allows us to get narrowed down towards what it originally said. Inevitably, some things get lost because the things we make are fickle, but there are ways to prevent that, and the main one is by double checking with the earliest versions we have.
Sure. In that case, like, do you think, I mean, bias is something that I've talked a lot about for classes that I take, like with forensic science. And I think that's something that exists in every field, right? Like, regardless of whom you speak to, there's always going to be a level of bias in there. Nobody's ever purely unbiased, at least not in my opinion.
It's essentially impossible.
Right, exactly. So in that case, like, like you said, right? Like people going back and checking some of the documentation from the past could help eliminate some of that.
Yes.
But I guess what I'm trying to I have like a very muddled question in my head, so I'm trying to filter that out a little further.
No worries, I get it.
So in the context of like history, is that the only way to eliminate bias, do you think?
That's one of the main ones.
Mm.
Just because the field of history, it's so hard to find original sources to begin with.
Right.
The only other real way is by getting out there and digging for more.
Right.
So we can either take what we have and peer review essentially by giving it to multiple people, getting their opinion, and finding the consensus among scholars from around the world, different backgrounds, all that. Or you can get down in the dirt and start digging and hope you find a new source, a new writing, a new artifact, something that helps illuminate the story further. That's pretty much it, though.
Right. And in that sense, like I guess in my head this connects for some reason. Maybe it doesn't. But like again, going back to what I mentioned earlier about psychedelics and religion and how there are some things that probably weren't spoken much of before. I guess I'm making that connection to ask this question. Is there a sense that possibly at some point I think you can get complacent about what you know about things, and are we just reticent to change in that case, or do you sense that history is reticent to change, or is there curiosity within like the establishment of history, if you will, to where they will still seek out more, or is it just the new ones that have to up and coming historians who probably do a lot of the digging?
A little bit of both. It depends on the person. So I know a lot of the time there are scholars who are set, they think this is what happened and this and such, and they're very adamant about their opinions.
Right.
Just because they've written about it a lot, and so it's their career kind of on the line, because if their opinions are proven wrong, then all those books they wrote about their opinions suddenly aren't worth much.
Right.
So that can be true. It's not always true.
Sure.
Some scholars really actively try to dig through and discover new things. So a lot of biases and reluctance to let go of old traditions is just kind of selfishness, I guess. And so it depends on what's the word I'm looking for? How magnanimous the scholar is, how willing they are to further new ideas rather than just sit with what's already existed. I don't know. I can't think of the right word to say. That's
okay.
The best way I can describe it.
That's okay. I think one way I'm seeing what you said is also from a sense of they don't want to let go of the financial motivation or the financial sort of benefit that they get from what already exists, right? Because
financial and also like their own personal reputation. Yes, exactly.
Right. Because a lot of those things come into question when, someone's like, oh, but now we have this evidence to show that what you said is probably not true. But then again, I think that's also a little unfair to those historians in the past who found those things.
Yeah.
Like if you look at it from another perspective, because us trying to find out more came from the fact that they found out that information to start with, right? To begin with. So to shun those things down, I think, is maybe not the best way to navigate it, but to just look at it as like a foundational step to get to where you're going.
Like, I mean, I can even kind of think of an example of what you're talking about when the archaeologist who discovered the city of Troy himself, he theorized that this hill in Turkey was where Troy was. And he went and literally took like stacks of dynamite and blew up the hill until he got like down to the layer that he thought existed during the period of time when Troy happened. Well, people at first were like, wow, he discovered the city of Troy. This is amazing. This is great. But as history's gone on, we've realized that was a very important step in understanding human history. But he blew up thousands of years of other history that also existed at that spot because he didn't care about it. He just cared
Right.
about that one period,
Mm.
which is sort of a big debate whether we should intentionally dig further for one time period or whether we should be more cautious and generalistic in what we discover. It's I've had a lot of professors with a lot of opinions on that, but
What are
yeah.
some of the opinions on that? Without taking any names, I'm sure you won't. But
No.
yeah,
So I know some people say, well, basically, if you're more focused, you might lose other artifacts from later periods that you could have found,
right.
but it's harder to find artifacts from a specific era if you're more general. So it'll take a lot longer, your research will cost more,
Right.
but it's the more humane way to do it, I guess, the more non-destructive. Whereas if you dig straight through, you don't care about those other time periods, you're going to find what you want to find quicker. But there's a lot that you might have been able to find, like say you're trying to dig down to some ruin from the 5th century. You could get down there really quickly and find what you're looking for, but there might be something from the 8th century that's even cooler you didn't know was there and got destroyed.
Right.
So it's a matter of like cost versus results.
I was just thinking about that, like the cost to benefit analysis of which one matters more, like what you are seeking or like the entirety of history, so to speak, in terms of what you might lose, and what history might be losing out on because of your actions to find out something that you're focused on, right? So yeah, I guess there's kind of like you said, there's arguments for either case, so it's hard to sort of navigate that.
It is, yeah.
Is there any incident in history that you think is more relatable to current times? I know that's a bit of a tangential question, but
well, there's a lot, really. I mean,
whichever one you want to pick on, go for it.
One thing that scares me a lot, like it makes me more nervous. Not scared. Scared is the wrong word, but there have been countless times where civilizations have come crashing down in the blink of an eye. For example, back during the Iron Age, it's theorized that a volcano eruption in Italy caused the Egyptian, Hittite, Sumerian, all these big societies in the Near East to just basically die out within 2 lifetimes, to where it was once big cities of 50,000 people, then it's just small villages of 100.
Right.
That's happened multiple times. It happened with the Iron Age. It happened with the Romans. It happened with the Chinese like 5 times.
Right.
So I feel like people really get complacent and thinking, oh, history's always moving forwards. Like progress always moves forwards, when what history shows us is it can just as easily go back if we're not careful.
And I guess that's where the adage comes from, right? Like that history repeats itself.
Exactly.
I think it's very easy to sometimes think that, oh, because we've reached a certain point of society, yeah, that's not likely to happen. But then while things might not happen the way they happened back in the day, similar things can happen in a current context.
That's why I think that history repeating itself, that's a good phrase, but one I've heard that I like better is history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme.
Ooh, I like that one. I like that one a lot. Yeah. Where did you hear that?
I can't remember. It's so
good.
disappointing. I can't.
No, it's all good.
But I just remember, I can't remember if it was reading something or watching a YouTube video, but I really liked it. And I've sort of, in my research that I do, live by that motto.
How does that help you navigate your research?
Well, I mean, I feel like a lot of times, one of my main research projects I've been working on is evaluating the development of a library collection for the Dutch Strangers Church in London. So I've been evaluating why certain things were donated and why certain books were gotten rid of and that kind of thing, and been using that to give evidence to an argument that libraries shouldn't restrict books. because it's natural for libraries to grow and change with growth and changes in the culture.
Right.
So, like, history's rhyming there because my research was focusing on the period of history. I think it's 1640s through 1650s,
Okay.
when the English Civil War was happening.
Hmm.
So during this time, there was a big uptick in donations to the libraries and some really interesting books. Like, you would think in a church library it'd be religious books and all that, and up until then it mostly was for the first 100 years. Then out of nowhere, people start donating transcripts of parliament meetings and like political books and atlases,
things that you
wouldn't expect in a church library.
Right.
But it was a very tense social and political time, and so these donations were caused by that change in the culture.
Right.
So by evaluating what's happened in the past, we can apply it to the future and see how the same trends happen, essentially, how it rhymes.
Right. Could you elaborate on what the Dutch Stranger Library is?
So the Dutch Strangers Library, it was started in 1550. I know the name of the guy who started it, but I can't think of it off the top of my head.
We'll come back to it if it does.
Essentially, they were Protestants who were fleeing from persecution, and the English king, the son of Henry VIII, I believe it was Edward VI. Don't quote me on that; I could be wrong. He wanted to set an example of what a European Protestant church looked like, because England had switched to Protestantism on paper, but all their churches essentially acted exactly the same as a Catholic church anyway. So he wanted to set an example. So he gave this decree, based like a king's decree, to establish this church, which doesn't exist for any other church in England besides the official state church of England and the official state church of Scotland. It's those two and this one little foreigners church that have that distinction and the powers provided because they were established by the king himself.
Right.
But so these Dutch people, they lived there for a while. They had to flee at one point when Queen Mary took over because she was Catholic and didn't want Protestants there. But they came back and have existed there for almost 500 years. So it's just really interesting because throughout that history, their library collection has existed that long. So you can see the influences of the culture for 500 years of not just British, but world history all the way through. And the main reason we were doing our research, my topic was just sort of a tangential thing. But after World War II, there's another library that belonged to the Archbishop of Canterbury that got bombed by the Nazis. And they lost 10,000 books that day. So the Dutch church donated these as a thank you for England liberating the Netherlands from Nazis, donated most of their library's collections to Lambeth Palace, where the Archbishop lives, and a couple other places that also got bombed. But our goal was to go and track those down so anyone interested in the history like we were could go and actually see them in person, because otherwise they're just books on a shelf. There's no real way to tell where they came from. So we were trying to...
Like the books, sorry to cut you off, but the books that went from the Dutch library to to the place where the Archbishop lives.
Yes. We were basically trying to give scholars a way to know exactly where it is and how to find it. My research more came out of that after seeing patterns emerge in the books I was looking at. But yeah. Sorry, I don't mean to ramble.
No, it's all good. I'm all for rambling. I think that's where you find a lot of these nuggets that are quite interesting to sort of dig into a little further. You were sort of at the question of how history rhymes and how you found that through your research. You might have already touched on this, but what are some other patterns that you've noticed in your research that you could possibly superimpose into other historical occurrences?
Right. Well, let's see. I mean, one series, like the Revolutionary Wars, there was the American Revolution, the French Revolution, and the Haitian Revolution. Those all were like a chain event and completely changed the way the world works. Those were all influenced by each other. I mean, you couldn't just look at the Haitian Revolution alone without the context of the others.
Right.
That's like a smaller window of time, maybe 40 years, but the same is true for all of human history. One thing doesn't happen without another. You just have to find out what that other thing is.
Because like one leads to the next.
Inevitably. Nothing ever happens spontaneously, is what I mean to say. And that's where I think history repeating itself, that idea comes from.
Right.
Off the top of my head, I can't think of any other instances.
That's okay.
But if I can, I'll let you know.
Okay. Sounds good. Not a problem. How much of seeking more out of history is purely just curiosity?
I'd say it's a fair amount. I mean, sometimes seeking more out of history can be a matter of personal glory. I mean, for researchers who are well established, seeking more can bolster their own net worth. But at the same time, they had to start somewhere, and there's a reason they're in their field. I feel like it always starts at least as a curiosity, because for me, I started learning about history and was really fascinated by it and wanted to learn more. And here I am, like 12, 13 years later, and it's basically what I've dedicated my life to. So yeah, I mean, I think there's always a matter of curiosity, at least at the start.
Right.
It may change over time. There may be other reasons that come into play, but it's always where it comes from.
Right. We're human after all, so I think our motivations to get us somewhere tend to change over time.
And I mean, there's some fields where money can be the primary factor, not with history. I mean, you can either teach or you can be a professor. Either way, you're not going to make much unless you're at like a nice school.
Right.
So.
Right. You mentioned the fact that like 12 to 13 years back, that's where you started. You might have already touched on this, but what was that one thing that got you interested?
I started my life in the public school system, and I was pretty good. I mean, I was good at school and all that, but my sister was struggling, so my mom decided to pull us out and put us into homeschooling. Not a lot of people do homeschooling for religious reasons. That wasn't for us. I mean, we literally just did it because my sister wasn't doing well in public school. But because of that, the program I got put into really encouraged curiosity and looking something up for yourself and learning more about it. So I could really hone in on what I was fascinated by. And what I was really fascinated by was ancient Rome. Like the program I did, Classical Conversations, if you've heard of it, they had us study Latin. And that, by studying Latin and learning about the way Rome worked, that's what really, really got me into history. I don't remember it anymore. I studied it for 6 years, but forgot all of it. But nonetheless, that passion started because I was given the freedom to look into and learn what interested me.
I guess I have another tangential question.
Feel free.
Based on what you mentioned about homeschooling and how people do it for religious reasons.
Yeah.
Is there any context to why people do that based in history by any chance?
Well, yeah. I mean, for most of human history, school was at home. So people would learn in the household. I mean, sometimes if you were wealthy enough, you could bring a governess to teach your kids, but there was no real public schooling system until probably the 19th or 20th century. So for most of human history, it was just families teaching each other or tutors being brought in to teach families. So for a lot of people, especially a lot of my friends, they thought that the modern public schooling system was faulty or lacking in a way. And by returning to that more historical, traditional schooling method, that they could become better educated. I don't personally buy into that. I mean, I enjoyed being homeschooled and I'm glad I was, but I think with the right teachers and right circumstance, that same effect can happen in a public school.
Right.
But that's why a lot of people do it. Like, especially some religious groups will think, yeah, I don't like that they don't teach what we believe in, so I'm going to bring my kids somewhere else, that kind of thing.
Right.
Whereas it is how things were done in the past, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's better.
Right, right. As you say that, I wonder if a lot of that is connected to solely Western history. The only reason I say that is because, at least from the context of Indian history,
Right.
I know, I don't know much about it, but I do know that there used to be this concept of a gurukul, which basically means school, like if you loosely translate it. And there would basically be a teacher or a guru and a few students who would go to the guru and learn from them.
Right.
Which is sort of similar to, I guess, public education.
That is true to an extent.
Right.
I think one of the main problems people have with the public schooling system is the size of it.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, especially, I don't know much about Indian history, but from what I'm hearing with these gurus,
it was smaller groups.
Smaller groups, yeah. For the homeschool group I was in, class sizes were limited to 12 because their reasoning was stupid. It was because there were 12 apostles.
Okay.
But
for those of them who don't know, what are the 12 apostles?
In the Bible, Jesus was preaching, and during his time preaching, there were these 12 guys. They were best buddies. They followed him around everywhere. Then he died, and they're like, well, guess we're still going to do that. And then they kept going. So
we were at the reasoning for why they did
that was
12. Yeah.
That was why they kept it at 12, but I think it's that same idea of limited class sizes for small groups where discussion can really happen. Like with a guru, that's a small group where it can be more one-on-one. Right. In a public school, it's a classroom where students are talked at a lot of the time.
Right.
I feel like, especially in our modern culture. In my education classes, they've been trying to change that, like trying to do more group work, more discussion, but very often it's just a teacher talking at students.
Right, right. I guess this will probably turn into more like an opinion-based question. Right. Do you think just homeschooling, like in your case, it probably didn't because you were able to like explore things with a little more freedom. But do you think homeschooling could possibly shut people out from certain parts of history just because their parents don't want them to know those things?
Absolutely. I know my group was pretty good about keeping history broad, but I was part of it's called a co-op, a homeschool co-op, where they have branches all across the country, but it's limited to just a few families, and you meet once a week, and there's a preset. So it's like a bridge between public and homeschooling, essentially. We meet once a week. There is a set curriculum, but the parents do most of the teaching every other day of the week, and the parents have some flexibility in there to do their own things. But say if a family's entirely on their own, which is also pretty common, the parents can teach whatever the hell they want with pretty much impunity. There's some states that require homeschoolers to take standardized testing like everyone else. For example, I lived in Florida for a while. I had to go and do my standardized tests every year, but Oklahoma doesn't. So a family could homeschool their kids, never teach them anything, and it's unfortunate. It really needs to be regulated more.
Right.
But when done right, it was a really good opportunity for me. But it is definitely possible for parents to restrict things they don't like.
Right, because I can see it sort of being motivated by, you want your kids to learn certain values and sort of exude those values once they go out into the real world. But I feel like to some extent you sort of stop their level of exploration.
Yeah.
I suppose, for the lack of a better word.
I could actually name a specific example where that kind of thing did happen to me.
Okay.
It was called Challenge A. I'm trying to think of the grade equivalent for the American public schooling system. Probably 7th grade.
Okay. So middle school?
Middle schoolish, right. Yeah. We were reading a book called The Secret Garden. It's a pretty good book if you haven't read it.
What is it about? Sorry.
It's about this young English... It's been a long time. About this young English kid, maybe an orphan, who goes to live with a new family, and there's like a fenced garden that she sneaks into, and it's this like beautiful paradise, and that's about all I remember.
Okay.
It's a pretty good book,
That's
but
fine.
I wish I knew more.
That's okay. That's
Anyway,
okay.
so the book was written by an author who was part of a religious group called Christian Science, which my dad grew up in, and my grandparents and aunts and uncles still practice. So I'm very familiar. Like, I've been to their services. I know how they work, what they believe. Essentially, they were started in the 1800s by this lady named Mary Baker Eddy, who basically argued that the physical world doesn't exist because there's evil in the world and God can't create evil, therefore the world doesn't exist, and it's all in the mind.
Interesting. Okay.
Yes. And because of that, one of their main focuses was on miracle healing. So they believe because there's no physical world, nothing in the physical world can heal you, only prayer can heal you. So they don't do any type of medicine or anything like that. They're the ones who establish the laws that allow anti-vaxxers to not vaccinate their children now.
Got it.
But beyond that, I mean, functionally in a lot of ways they're just like a normal church, just with weird beliefs. But the author is a Christian Scientist, and when we get to class the first day, we're discussing it, and my teacher goes, yeah, there are some magical things that happen in the book, but keep in mind the author's a Christian Scientist and they believe in magic, so don't think that it's actually real. And that brought me back because my grandma was very involved in the church and all that, very active member. And she hated that I read Harry Potter. Like, she vitriolically hated that I was reading a book about magic. So I just raised my hand and went, that's not true. And my teacher looked at me and said, what do you mean that's not true? And I told her, my dad grew up in the Christian Science church. I have family members who are in it, and they don't believe in magic. And she said, well, this book that we're reading out of that talks about the secret garden says that they believe in magic. And I was like, great, you're wrong.
Right.
But finally, she had to concede defeat because she didn't know anything about them. She was just regurgitating what this...
she's heard probably in the past, right?
Yeah, what she's heard in the past, what this study guide that we were assigned said. So there can be some instances where things are, not even just things are left out, but facts are changed to alienate other groups or make them seem strange. Not just because you don't like it, but because you want to discourage looking further.
Discourage looking further, or maybe putting people off from wanting to be those things or wanting to be in those things?
Well, yeah, I mean, like the idea of don't read Harry Potter, it'll turn you evil. Like, that kind of thing.
Right. I'm sure a lot of people who've read Harry Potter are not evil.
No, right? Definitely not.
Right.
My grandma once tried to have an intervention with me when I was 9, and I just was so confused. I was like, what's wrong with it? And she said, it teaches things that are against the Bible. And I asked her to tell me what it teaches that's against the Bible, and she said magic. And I was like, yeah, it's fake. This is a fictional story.
Right.
What else? And she couldn't name anything else.
Yeah, this next question is probably a little more philosophical than it is historical, I guess.
Yeah.
Oh, now the question's disappeared. Great. No, fuck. We'll get there. And by the way, you can curse if you want. I probably should have mentioned that earlier too.
I've said ass once or twice.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. It's completely fine. I guess what I was trying to get at philosophically was more so this sense of maybe not letting people make mistakes, be it through the curiosities they explore, the things that they do, and so on. Like, do you think, like, the history establishment, and maybe this touches on a previous question I've already asked, so if it does, we can just move on to something else and you just let me know. But do you think the history establishment, for the lack of a better word, are afraid of making mistakes from like wanting to seek out more, or possibly, I don't know, like, it's just a very tangential thought that probably doesn't, it's not a well-cooked thought, but...
No, I get what you're saying. Kind of. It's inevitable that mistakes will be made,
right?
But historians try to establish systems to mitigate that, like peer review. Like, having other authors write about what you're writing about. In fact, one of my professors said during his master's and doctorate program, they mostly just taught him how to disagree with people.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Because that is an important skill.
Yeah, not just being like, oh yeah, that's great in discussion posts, but actually contradicting and having debate about it. So there are ways to try to prevent that, but it will inevitably happen. And so historians will try to improve and change their beliefs and thoughts about any given topic if it's proven wrong. But there's not really much they can do until it's proven wrong. If a fact is considered a fact, it's a fact until it's not. So, less they're afraid to be wrong and more they don't really know that they're wrong until they know. I mean, yeah. Unless the author or researcher specifically lying to people, that's a different instance. In that case, there have been times when historians have just fabricated things for personal glory.
Right.
And that does happen because they're afraid to be wrong. They don't want to put in the hard work to find truth. Why do that when you can just make something up and then everyone will love you?
Right. And you'll be revered by everybody around you and so on. All right, can you think of any examples where a historian might have lied about something that maybe...
Let me think.
I'm just curious.
I've heard examples before, but none are springing immediately to mind.
That's okay.
I've heard it in other fields like science. I'm trying to remember though. If I can, I'll let you know.
That's okay. That's okay. I think that's something it's quite interesting to, I guess, navigate that as well, because then you know.
Well,
go ahead.
The first historians like what's his name? Herodotus? I can't remember. They're like the very first historians that we know of. A lot of them were Greek and Roman. And nowadays, peer review is a very important thing. Citation is a very important thing. Back then, though, they would just go from place to place and talk to people about their stories and history. So they'd say, yeah, and then this one city in Asia Minor, they fought a dragon and won the day and stole its pot of gold. And that would be the history because they didn't know the dragons didn't exist.
Right.
So in the past, that happened a lot where it was just kind of partly history, partly making crap up because it sounded cool.
Right.
Doesn't happen as much nowadays, but it does still sometimes.
Here's another tangential question. In terms of mythology or mythology, however that word is said, like how do people in the field of history draw a line between knowing what is a myth and what is history?
It can be hard. I mean, we touched before on Troy, and that was considered a myth for a long time until it was proven otherwise. So
is it just a matter of finding evidence?
Finding evidence, really. I'm of the belief that all myths have an origin somewhere, maybe not as fantastical or divine as the stories would imply, but I think that every story comes from something.
Sure.
So, like, maybe it didn't happen exactly the way the myth says, but there might be a kernel of truth in there.
Could it be possible that stories people told about certain occurrences in history turned into myths? I don't know if that makes sense, but...
Right. I mean, myth might not be the word we use, but that happens a lot with, like, historical fiction movies. For example, they'll take this time period, put fake people into it, tell a grand story. Like, the first thing that comes to mind is Inglourious Bastards. I mean...
Okay.
Have you heard of that movie?
I have not.
I'm pretty sure it's fictional. It might be a true story, but I'm fairly certain it's not.
Based on true events or something like that, yeah.
But it's about
Spoiler
this,
alert.
like... It's about a ragtag group of American GIs fighting their way through Nazi Germany and that kind of stuff. So I can't speak to the historicity of it, but just that kind of storytelling in the past has always been a thing. Like, a lot of, I keep returning to Homer, but that's what that was too. Fictionalized stories of great battles of the past. It still happens today, just no longer called myths.
I was just wondering about it from a context of some of the Indian like religious stories and the connections to how people call them myths versus how people say that there's evidence. I personally haven't done much research to find the evidential items that people are talking about, in all honesty. I've just heard about them through stories that family members might have told and so on. So, but yeah, that was sort of where that thought stemmed from. But I guess changing gears a little into like some of your other interests, you mentioned games.
Yeah.
Was that something you always did as a kid, gaming?
Not much. I had a Wii when I was little, played Wii Sports, Lego, Star Wars, all that, but I really got into it probably around 2012, 2013.
Okay.
When the 3DS came out, my cousin had one and came over with it, and my mind was blown. I was like, oh, I didn't know that could do that. That's amazing. And so I really got into it after that point.
I think that thing of being mind blown about games came to me with the Wii. Because I think I went to someone's house and played on it, and I was like, whoa. I wouldn't necessarily call myself a gamer of any sorts, but I would play things here or there.
I used to be. Now I don't have time for that anymore. I wish I did, but that's how it is.
Right. What are some games that are your favorites, I guess?
Oh,
your favorite games?
That is a tough question, my friend.
Let's explore it.
The Xenoblade series is one that I really enjoy.
Could you hit on what that is?
Yeah, so it's a series. I don't know how spoilerly you were wanting me to get.
Go all spoiler. Okay. Spoiler alert. Go ahead.
So basically, the first game is about the whole world takes place on the backs of two titans.
Okay.
Like colossal beings that once were alive, and creatures grew on them and developed into societies, and now like they're at war with each other. Well, turns out those beings were both once people, and they were lab researchers who did an experiment on singularities and accidentally wiped out the old universe and became gods of the new one. So it's really interesting to me. And then like one of them that the main characters live on, turns out he survives off of consuming the souls of the people who live on him.
Okay.
So then they go and kill God. It's a whole thing.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Not sure if a lot of religious people would like that, but
no. So the series is very inspired by the ideas of a ancient religious group called the what are they called? The Gnostics.
Okay.
They were a group of early Christians who basically believed that the being who created the universe and God were two separate things, and the one who created the universe was evil.
Interesting.
So like this evil creature created the universe, created life and everything, and there's a more holy, divine, spiritual one that gave us our souls. Basically, that it's all to explain why evil exists in the world. That's why a lot of religions exist, honestly. But it takes inspiration from that, like a creator god that's evil. And then the second game, it takes place in it's separate from the first one, like a new world, but same basic idea, except all the titans this time are shaped like animals. And there's a center place called the World Tree that they're trying to get to. And by the end of the game, they get to the top, find out it's a space station that looks suspiciously like where the experiment in the first game happened.
Gotcha.
Then they find out that the god in this world is the remorseful half of the god in the last world that got left behind and restarted humanity to try and atone for his sins. So it's really weird and metaphysical, but I find it fascinating.
Metaphysical, I guess, is a good way to describe that. I'm sorry, I'm really curious about the thing that you just mentioned about like religion and evil and how religion is a way of explaining evil. Is that kind of what you said?
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of want to jump back on that, maybe going back a little.
Yeah, no worries.
Elaborate on that thought for me a little.
Well, not all belief systems are about that, but one of the most important questions to humanity is, why do bad things happen?
Right.
Because to a lot of people, the thinking is, well, bad things don't have to happen, but they still do. Why is that? For example, um, the Zoroastrians, they were a religious group in Persia a long time ago. They believed that bad things happen because there were two gods. One was, I can't remember the names of these divine beings. Basically, there was a good god and a bad god. The bad god caused bad things to happen. The good god caused good things to happen. And that sort of evolved into the Christian ideology of God and Satan. But even other religions, I mean, for example, Shintoism in Japan, a lot of bad kami, like there's good kami and there's bad kami, and there's other like divine beings that cause bad things to happen, and you can pray to the kami for protection from those bad things. I feel like in almost every religion I can think of, the matter of good and evil is one of the key tenets. I don't know personally much about Hinduism or anything like that, unfortunately. I really want to do more research on that, so I can't speak much to the myths and legends and gods there.
That's okay, sure.
But I don't know, what do you think? Like, what does Hinduism think about all that?
Oh, I think that's a lot to explore, in the sense of I think, and I'm no authority in this.
Right.
I think it's similar to other ways of viewing things, but a lot of it is also sort of connected to karma and like the concept of doing things.
That is a great example.
Right. Of how, I guess if you look at it from a perspective of getting to the peak of spirituality or being connected to God, how I understood it from my readings of the Bhagavad Gita, which I think I don't know if I'll I think that I've not fully understood it, and I want to go back and read it again. There's parts of it towards the end that I haven't completely gotten to, but I think
I get it. I'm the same with the Bible.
Right. But I do want to read it again just to sort of see how Prateek now. I don't know why I'm talking of me as a third person, but anyway, I don't know how I wonder how I would look at it now compared to how I did 2 years back when I first started reading it.
Yeah.
So anyway, sorry, I sort of lost myself there. But what I was trying to get at was, I think, depending on what good and bad you do in your existence, you either get closer to God or you get further away. And it's sort of like a ladder that you're climbing, that you could get 2 steps up and go 3 steps down, and so on. But eventually you get closer, I think, is sort of the understanding that I get from it. And evil could be a lot of things, right? Like they dictate that killing animals is evil or eating animals is evil, for example. I'm a Hindu that eats animals. So, I also sort of see it from a perspective of, those things add up. So I guess it depends on the good and the bad that you're doing.
Right.
And all of those things sort of add up to where that decides where you end up on that ladder when this life ends.
Right.
Because we believe in reincarnation and all that sort of stuff, right? To where you could be born again as a human being and into a different existence. And that, again, I guess, decides where you end up once that life ends.
Yeah.
But I guess the thought that I just had, which is sort of throwing me for a loop now, is what if I'm born a Christian, right? In the next life? Like, how will that connect to this?
That is
maybe
really
it does.
Interesting.
Right. Like, maybe it does, right? But I don't know. Like,
who's to say? I never thought about the implications of that.
Right.
That's really interesting.
But maybe I will be born a Hindu, but just in a different place, right?
Right. I would imagine if you were on the path to enlightenment, then you would probably be kept on that path.
Right.
That's what I would think, at least.
Right. But I think, and that's sort of, I guess, as I say this out loud, leads credence to one of my other personal beliefs, is that there's only one God, but the way people see it on this planet is very different.
Yes.
So I wonder if that has anything to do with that. Again, not an authority.
No, definitely not.
But I just wonder. I don't know. Like I think it's very hard to grasp some of these things, or to understand them fully. But go
That's
ahead.
basically the purpose of religion, trying to grasp that.
Right.
That's what everyone is trying to do, trying to understand what is beyond us, why things happen as they happen, how to live the best life to live. And that's a trait a lot of people could sympathize with.
Right.
I kind of agree with you what you were saying before. I mean, I feel like God reveals himself in a lot of ways to a lot of people. I have faith in what I believe, but I'm not so naive as to be like, no, only me, only my book, all that. I mean, I believe in what I believe and I don't believe anything else. But if someone else finds a way to God in another way, I mean, I don't know. It's a hard question to answer, but it's an interesting thing to talk about.
Right. Because, I mean, if you think about it from one perspective, right? Like, if you just look at God as one being and us as, or like different religions as different perspectives of viewing God.
Yeah.
Like, wouldn't you say, hey, more power to you for like trying to figure that out, trying to get on that path of enlightenment versus being like, oh, this is the way to the path.
Yeah.
This is the path.
I mean, for me, if someone talks to me saying, I want to be a Christian, how do I do that or whatever, I'm going to say, great, that's awesome. I would love to show you how to do that. But if someone says, I want to be Hindu or I want to be a Muslim and I'm trying to learn how to do that, I'd say, great, tell me about how you're going to do that.
Right.
Because it's more about how I can help them if that's what they choose. Whereas I am still really interested. Like, I often go to events for the MSA here on campus and HSA sometimes.
Right. Those are the Muslim and the Hindu student associations.
Yes,
for those of you who don't know.
I should be clear.
Oh, no, you're good. You're good.
But I don't know. Religion just fascinates me. That's why I chose religious studies over theology, because it's more broad. It studies more aspects, and it's really interesting to me.
Yeah. No, I think religion is. I find religion quite fascinating as well, because one of the things I want to do, I cannot remember if I've said this out loud or on a live recording or not, but one thing I want to do is read like the major books, at least in Hinduism and Christianity and in Islam.
Yes.
Solely for the purpose of seeing how much of it is common, like how much of the information that's in there could possibly overlap with each other.
I do the same thing. Literally, I've started a book collection at home of various religious texts of world religions. Like, I have multiple Bibles because, I mean, I'm biased, obviously, but I have a couple Qurans. I'm trying to build it out more. I have a Torah, a few different things, but it fascinates me. I love learning about it.
Right. And I think, like, I guess people, when you say those kind of things, or when we say those kind of things, I think people tend to have a negative reaction towards those. Or maybe I've sensed that generally.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm making that up. I mean, tell me if I am. But
I get what you mean.
Right. Because I think people then try to wonder if, you're unsure about what you believe in, or if you're trying to seek something else.
Yeah.
Right? Like, regardless of what the goal is for that person, I think the perspective that I'm looking at it from is more so to strengthen my own beliefs.
Yes, exactly.
And I think if that is the motivation, why shouldn't you be allowed to explore those things, right? Like, I think we sort of get carried away by, like, my beliefs are right, yours are wrong, don't do that, don't do this. Like, why are you curious about that? Or why are you curious about this? Like, I know, again, I don't know if I've said this out loud on a podcast or not, but I think I've talked about it, like, outside of this. I remember a kid when I used to live in the Middle East. I was talking to this Muslim kid about, like, the things I know about Ramadan and Eid and, like, the significance of a lot of things, and he was like, "Why don't you become a Muslim?" And this is a kid. Granted, I was maybe 10, and this guy was maybe 12 or 13, or maybe even 15 for that matter. So none of us had our heads in place. I don't know if I still do, but anyway, it was like, like, okay, interesting question. Didn't think much of it then, because I was like, well, I mean, I was born Hindu. That's all I know. That's all I'm going to stick to, right? I think it's interesting, right? Like, I think that curiosity about those things can also be misconstrued as lack of belief, if that makes sense.
It can also be misconstrued by some people in the place you're curious about as interest in joining. I mean, like you said, there's a lot of mixed up ideas about curiosity in that regard, and I definitely get that. Like, I've had some people in churches I've gone to say that they've read the Quran just out of curiosity, like I have. I've had others, like my grandma, love her to death, she's the sweetest lady, but she asked me why I had a Quran with me when I came home from school one day, and I was like, oh yeah, I talked to a Muslim guy for like 2 hours, he gave it to me for free. And she was like, you what? I eventually explained to her, like, we had just conversation about beliefs and what they believe versus what I believe, commonalities, differences, and all that, and she chilled out a little, but still there is that hesitance there, thinking, oh, what if they're trying to find something else?
Right. Yeah, I don't think I've put this out there because it was something that I was trying to do a couple of years back. But whenever I would get on Uber rides, I would try to get an Uber driver to like come on the podcast, just to sort of like I guess spontaneously find someone whom I have no clue about whatsoever, just strike up a conversation, right? And see if they'd be interested. So one of those times when I was trying that, I was talking to this one guy, I think, who was Christian, and we were just having a conversation and talking about stuff, and I was mentioning to him how I'm curious about these things, I want to read da 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 da. A few minutes later, he pulls out a Bible out of his car and he's like, here you go. I was like, no, it moved me. Like, personally, like, I found that touching because someone was like, oh, like, here, like, let me share. Again, I don't know what his motivations for sharing it were.
I was going to offer to give you one if you wanted it after we're done recording. So.
Oh, cool. No, I mean, if you have an extra one that you wanted to, like, pass on, I'd be more than happy to take it.
I'll have to see. I have like 9.
Okay, cool. It's all good. But yeah, it moved me personally, but because I was like, oh, I'm curious about this. I want to read about it. So, I mean, I haven't gotten to reading it in all honesty. It's still sitting in my drawer of books.
Right.
I think I was like, oh, interesting. Like, again, like I said, I don't know what his motivation for sharing that was. But yeah, I think, okay, like, cool. Like, in some sense, I saw it as an opportunity that was given to me to seek more information about this and to sort of get to where I want to be in terms of reading those books and strengthening my own beliefs about the God that I believe in, if that's one way we want to see it.
Right.
So yeah, I don't know. I don't know why we're scared to like explore. I don't know, like
just that's a great question. It really is.
Yeah. Maybe this is something that I don't know if I ever will be able to ask any people in my family about this, but I just wonder, like, maybe I'd love to strike up a conversation with somebody in my family, right? Like, to be like, why are we afraid of like just getting to know about these things, right?
Yeah.
Like, sure, we hear some things through conversation with other people and so on, but that's very surface level information. It's just
very passive.
Very passive. None of it is depth. None of it is in depth. And again, like, on the flip side, everybody has their own life. Everybody is busy with their own things. So you don't really get the time to do these things. And that's completely understandable too, right? Like, I mean, shit, I'm carried away with my own stuff. So, you don't really get the time to do those things.
Yeah.
So I can understand that side of things. But I think being like, no, you shouldn't, yeah, like, maybe pump the brakes over there a little. I can also understand the fear, and I'd like for you to jump in to see what you think about it. But I can also understand the fear from a sense of, if there's something that you find enticing, that it could pull you in.
Yeah.
Which is it's understandable from a perspective of, like, say, your mother or your father being like, hey, like, maybe don't do that. Like, I don't know if that's the right thing to do. But then that again comes from maybe a place of feeling like you've not gotten what you wanted out of what you've believed in, right?
Right.
So maybe it's the role of the family to jump in and help them strengthen that belief more. instead of sort of making them think that they could get sucked in by just exploring something else.
Yeah.
Like, what is your thought on that?
No, I get what you're saying. I mean, ultimately, if you find more value and fulfillment in something, I don't think you have any obligation necessarily to stick with what your parents believe unless you
Mm.
want to avoid conflict.
Yeah,
For
that's
me,
usually the motivation, right? But
yeah, that's
sorry,
usually
anyway.
motivation.
Yeah.
My parents, at least, are less conservative in that regard. My
Right.
grandma is the one that's really like that in my life.
Right.
But again, love her to death. She's so sweet.
Love you, Grandma.
I don't know. I mean, I, for one, feel very firm and confident in what I believe. And so whenever I've investigated, I've never really felt that kind of draw.
Right.
But I know other people who have felt that kind of draw when reading other books or finding out more about other religions. So if you don't want to leave your religion, maybe don't examine. And if you find yourself researching other religions and looking interested in it, maybe that's where you should go.
Right.
I don't know. It's a matter of whether you want to stay with where you are or whether you're willing to go with where life takes you.
Right.
For me, I've researched a lot of religions and I still feel pretty confident in what I believe in.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah, and I relate to that sentiment a lot because like the things that I believe in and the practices that I've been a part of have given me this life, right?
Yes.
Like I've had a lot of personal experiences, which we can probably talk about off camera, but
Yeah.
right, I've had certain experiences where those things have strengthened my belief in the faith that I practice, right? So for me also, like I am not worried about possibly being enticed by something else because I'm pretty confident that I will stick to what I've grown up with because I've had personal experiences that have kept me there. And that's pretty much it, right? Like there's nothing to worry about.
I'm the exact same. I absolutely understand.
Right. So, but I see what you mean in terms of, right, you know, if you have that fear that you might be sucked into something that you don't want to avoid conflict, then okay, like maybe find that ground where you feel like you're at a position where you can explore and maybe then do it, right?
Yeah.
But again, I'm no authority, so take that for what you will.
Maybe like try to find some stable footing where you are before you reach out again.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Whatever that looks like, whether it's getting more involved with your religious organization or reading your religious text more, that kind of thing.
Right. Or just like, and I think a lot, and because of the world that we live in today, a lot of this information exists out there on YouTube. For example,
yes. Yeah.
Right. So go watch videos, explore those things. And again, like I like to sort of think of it this way sometimes, just to go in with some skepticism.
Yes.
Because always like people, whenever they share these things, their personal motivations are also like sort of contributing to why they share those things, right?
Yeah.
So
like probably they're sharing it to try and get you interested in believing it.
Right. So
a lot of the time, not all the time.
Right, not all the time, but like, you know, exercise that skepticism and sort of fact check things and explore it from multiple sources, right?
Yes.
But I don't think you should be stopped from exploring.
No.
If you want to. But then again, I don't know how many people are going to be happy with me saying this, but that's okay. That's okay. That's completely fine. But no, it's just, I think it's something to think about, right? Because isn't that what freedom is in some sense?
Yes. Yes. I completely agree.
Yeah.
Being able to find what you're interested in, what you believe on your own without the restrictions or judgment.
Right. Because again, maybe this is easier said than done, but what's better? Something that you believe in because you've found or you've had experiences or you've sort of sought out information to where that strengthened your belief, or just blindly believing something because you've been told that that's what your family believed and that's all you need to believe.
Yeah. I feel like that happens a lot.
Right. Which again, like I can understand because a lot of it is rooted in, like, you know, I might lose out on my family if I take this other path, X, Y, and Z, which I can completely understand. Like those are very reasonable feelings to not want to, I guess, explore anything else. But I think you would want to rather be in box A where you've strengthened your own belief, right? So that's something that I try to remind myself as well a lot, in that I would rather be in a position of strengthening my own belief through learning about things and personal experiences rather than blindly believing something.
Right.
Because I don't think that serves you any good.
No.
Right.
Like, I started to get really interested in learning more about other cultures and other beliefs because I had grown up in a Baptist church in good old country
Right.
all my life, and I wanted to know more. So I did it for myself. I didn't really like have a mind of, oh, I need to stay where my family is. I just went out, researched other religions, found out more about them, and decided I wanted to stay where I was because
Right.
I liked it the most.
Yeah.
That may change. I mean, I don't go to the church that I used to go to anymore, really. I'm trying to find one right now, but as far as like general religion, I'm staying where I am.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I see what you mean. But yeah, I don't know. I think as we're coming to the end of recording, I think a good note to sort of cap off on. I think not all curiosity is bad, and that's why I think I'm not a big fan of that phrase of curiosity kills the cat. Is that what the phrase is?
Yes.
Yeah, because I wonder if there's more to that than just that phrase, right? Because I know there's a lot of other proverbs from the past, like not religious proverbs, but like just generalistic ones, where what is commonly known is just part of it and not the whole thing. Like with that saying, what is that? I just had it in my head. I think it was some sports person who said it. Something about like being the jack of all trades, you're not
Jack
the
of all
master
trades,
of none.
master of none.
Right, but then I guess there is a connection to that, to where the full thing is you're better off being a jack of some trades rather than the master of none. I think I read that somewhere, or I heard about it somewhere and then Googled it. I was like, oh, interesting. Like, I like that more because that makes a lot more sense, right? Because I think with being the master of one, like, nothing wrong with that if that's what you want to do, but I guess I personally would like to be a jack of some trades, if not all. And like at least be aware of multiple different fields.
I mean, knowing things about multiple different fields and multiple different topics doesn't preclude you from being having mastery in other things.
Right.
We're not just one trait. We're varied people with varied skill sets and ideas, and our lives and actions and studies, beliefs should reflect that.
Right. And in that sense as well, right? Like, I think sometimes what happens is, or I've heard this other phrase of, I'm forgetting how it's like said verbatim, but something along the lines of how like your lack of information in something could lead to an uncooked opinion, I guess.
I know what you're talking about, but I don't remember it either.
Right, and that's okay. But I think that is also a fair argument. But I think that's where you sort of have to realize that what you might be wrong about things, right? And that's completely fine too, right?
Yeah.
I might be wrong about certain things, and I sort of have to accept that I can be wrong about certain things. And I think knowing that would sort of help you let go of that feeling of, undercooked knowledge or whatever, because you only know so much. And I think once you start to understand things a little more, you realize that there's a lot more you don't know. So yeah, it's just, like going back to the point of curiosity, I think that is very important. And I think it's important to almost everything in life, almost. Like, I've not lived life long enough to know that, but I feel that from a sense of hearing about other things and so on.
I know a lot of people who've never wanted to be curious and are fine with the way things are, and that's how you want to live. That's fine. Nothing wrong with that. But
whatever floats your boat.
Whatever floats your boat. But I mean, curiosity can bring so much more richness to your understanding in life. It has to mine. I love that I've gotten to explore so many different ways things are, different possibilities. I wouldn't trade that experience and that knowledge for anything.
Right. And I mean, what we're doing right now is a product of my curiosity as well. So, I'm happier for it, right? It like, if you explore those curiosities, I think you don't live with the regret of not trying something.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know this is very cliche to say, but, there's a lot of these sayings in the self-improvement world where they're like, you would rather do something and fail at it and instead of not doing something and regretting that you didn't do it. I know I butchered that completely, but sort of like, I guess you understand what I'm trying to get at in the sense that you want to at least explore it to know whether or not it's your cup of tea. If it's not, it's not.
Yeah.
But at least you can appreciate the fact that you've tried.
Yeah. You can say that you gave it a shot and it wasn't for you, rather than just being stubborn and refusing.
Right. Exactly. So, yeah, it's just, hey, whatever floats your boat, but be curious. I guess that's something, if you want to take away from this, that's what you should take away.
I agree. Be curious.
Cool. I think that's a very good note to close off on. So thank you so much, Christian, for coming on. I had fun.
I did too. This was a blast.
Okay, I'm glad.
I can't believe we've been here for an hour and a half.
Yeah, we have been here for an hour and a half. So thank you once again. I appreciate you taking the time. And yeah, for those of you watching or listening, thank you so much. We'll see you guys next time.
See you later.